Ladies and gentlemen, if you're looking to build an affordable gaming PC for roughly $800, just under £700 here in the UK, then you're in luck, because in today's video we're going to be putting together something incredibly awesome, something that's going to be kick-ass when it comes to gaming, and something that isn't going to cost an arm and a leg. Throughout this video we're going to go through absolutely everything that you need. We'll show you what's hot, what's not, how to put it all together, and of course show you those all-important gameplay benchmark numbers so you can see exactly how this thing performs. And of course, we couldn't make this without acknowledging the fact that PC gaming right now is in a little bit of a funny place where everything seems to be quite inflated. But the whole purpose of this video is to help you navigate your world through that and to show that actually budget PC gaming is a little bit more alive than you might think. So stay tuned to learn absolutely everything you need to know right after a short word from this video's sponsor. The Aorus Master 16 has arrived, bringing both jaw-dropping visuals and super slick frame rates. This stunning machine packs a 16x10 Quad HD OLED display for an unreal level of detail running up to 240Hz. Not only that, but the Master 16 uses the latest NVIDIA 50 series of GPUs for DLSS 4 and ray reconstruction, in addition to the second generation of Intel Core Ultra Mobile CPUs for both performance and power efficiency. Learn more about this beastly machine today with a link below. Kicking things off then, I want to start with the graphics card, because this is going to be the talk of the town. It is definitely the hardest component to get at the right price, especially if you are in the US at the moment. In the UK, I have seen these for the right price and actually slightly under, which was pretty cool, but obviously it's going to vary depending on the time of checkout. And in the US, this is a little bit overinflated, but the problem is we don't know if that's going to get worse or get better because we're living in very strange times. I'll say no more than that. The one that we're using here is from ASRock, but this is an Intel ARC B570. And the B570, when it launched, was one of those cards that was a great card, but kind of at the wrong price, because you could buy the B580 in theory for just a little bit more, and it had a fair bit more performance and more VRAM. But as I say, we live in very weird times where, specifically in the US, you just can't get hold of a B580, not for anywhere close to the right price. So for a budget gaming PC, this is still going to have loads of performance. It's actually got 10 gigabytes of VRAM, which is more than both the 5060 and 5060 Ti 8GB have, which is kind of laughable when you think about it. And it's also going to be able to do a little bit of ray tracing, but don't rely on it. But for 1080p and even 1440p gaming, it is going to excel, as we'll show you a little bit later. But let's very neatly and carefully plot this down and save it for on, because of course we need to press on and actually get this build started. And the best way to do that is to kick off with the motherboard. And I know this is going to confuse some people because we're actually going for an Intel rig this time.
What? Intel? What's wrong with you? You've got to go Ryzen!
Well, obviously, if you want to go for Ryzen, go for AMD. But, and to be clear, I would do that in most scenarios, but in this particular one, something has caught my eye, and this is the current price point on this CPU, the Ryzen, it's not Ryzen, let's have it, the Intel Core i5 14400F. This is a 10-core CPU, which actually makes it better for productivity, really, than the equivalent Ryzen 5, because that only has 6. Having said that, the Ryzen 5 7600 is going to have better performance in games. It's not going to be a crazy difference, and it's obviously not going to matter if you're not bottlenecked by the CPU, but if you can get the motherboard and CPU combination for a fair bit less than you would with the equivalent from AMD, then actually that would make sense if you're trying to kind of, well, just save as much money on your gaming PC while still maintaining great performance. Having said that though, I'm using this ROG Strix B760 motherboard because it's the one I happen to have, but the one I'd probably recommend to most people, again to save money, is actually the Gigabyte B760 Gaming, because you can get this for around about 120, 130 pounds or dollars or so. You all have to go for DDR5 memory, so bear this in mind. We'll leave links to everything featured and some other suggestions down below, but I know this is supposed to be a beginner-friendly gaming PC, and it definitely is, but it is slightly complicated because the reason I'm suggesting particular motherboards here is because this is a 14th generation Intel CPU, and these motherboards were geared around 13th generation, which means you need to do a BIOS update, which is very straightforward. But in order to do that without having an old CPU, you need one that has USB BIOS flashing utilities. So this one has it. The Gigabyte one I'm suggesting does, which is why I'm being very specific, but we'll show you how to do that a little bit later. I know it sounds complicated. If you don't want to do any of that, obviously you could go for AMD, but then you'd still be limited really to a CPU that came out at the time that the board came out, if that makes sense. I'm so sorry that this has turned out to be so complicated, but I promise that is the hardest thing in this video. And to prove it, we can actually get this out of the box and start our work. So this is a white motherboard in a white case, but obviously you go for whatever color you want, really. You're kind of a little bit limited now because obviously most of the manufacturers have moved on to Intel Core Ultra, but as we know, the gaming performance on that isn't exactly fantastic. Maybe there'll be some really good budget-friendly CPUs that will come out and we're like kind of move over to them. But at the moment, if you can buy a 10-core 14400F for just over £100, as I say, that's actually a lot of CPU for your money. But this also is a micro ATX one. The case we're using is full-size ATX, whereas the Gigabyte one is a blackboard and it's full-size ATX, which would just fit a little bit better. But as I say, suggestions to everything I'll link down below. When you're trying to save money, you're always a little bit more limited in terms of options. Whoa, 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 hang on a second. Future markers here. The motherboard we're using here is the earlier DDR4 revision of this Strix. There is a newer one that is still being sold, but this is DDR5. So if you are going to go for this, make sure you buy DDR5 memory. There is a tough version of the motherboard, but this is DDR4, but doesn't come with a USB BIOS flashback utility, so is essentially no good for 14th gen unless you know it's pre-flashed, which you don't, but yes. Back to the video. Opening up our socket ready to receive is incredibly straightforward. You just need to lift this with a fair bit of force and then just gently get this flap so it's facing up. Do not touch any of these pins here or your PC will literally break and you'll be very, very sad. Then you can grab your CPU. That will come in a lot more glamorous box than this, but this is just the way Intel samples their CPU sometimes, which is fun. Then you get your chip and they obviously all look very similar if they're in the same generation, because they do of course need to go in the exact same socket. And without any force whatsoever, please try not to drop this because again, sad times occur. You can just gently lay this in place until it just fits in snugly. Then just push this down. This is meant to ping off like that. That's just a protection so you don't damage the pins. And then with your other hand, you can just gently get that back into position. And then once we've done that, we can move on to our random access memory, or our RAM. And I don't actually think you can get hold of this particular kit anymore, but again, I will leave a recommended one down below. The main thing to bear in mind is that this is a DDR4 motherboard, so we need DDR4 memory, and most manufacturers have now moved on to making DDR5. So if you go with a suggested motherboard, then that will need to be DDR5. It's a fair bit faster as well, but do be advised that it is actually slightly more expensive, which means that even though this motherboard is more expensive than the one that I'm suggesting, you kind of can save a fair bit of money if you buy a cheaper set of memory actually, but either way, go for 32 gigabytes. This is the other thing I want to get across. Last time we did our cheapest gaming PC, which was actually with this GPU, you can find it in the top right corner of your screen. In any Unreal 5 games, we actually found that it was wanting to use the full 16 gig of RAM just for the game, which is why 32 is definitely going to be a better bet. And bear in mind, you can buy a decent kit actually of DDR4 for under £50 here in the UK, and it is going to make games run better today. So definitely worth the cash if you can afford that, but just gently line these slots up so they actually fit into this motherboard and then push them into place so that they are in slots 2 and slots 4. Whilst you might have to do a fair bit of shopping around to make sure that you're getting the right kit of memory at the right price, it's not the same when it comes to the SSD, because actually my go-to recommendation for a budget SSD is this one. It's from Acer. It's the one with the horrible green label, FA200. You can find this for around about £60 here in the UK. It's PCI Generation 4. It's got loads of speed. It's not got like crazy features and things, but ultimately it just is a decent amount of storage for a decent price, which is what most people want from their gaming rig. Just open up the top slot with a screwdriver, then you can take this off and remove it. There will also be like a little film to take off as well. Please don't forget to do that or it will cost you a little bit of thermal performance on your SSD. Then it's just a case of lining this up with the slot and then securing it into position, but just put that back in place and then fit it down. And then once you've done that, you are pretty much ready to go. But actually, I want to draw your attention to the fact that you'll probably get a retail box like this, and inside it will likely come with this bad boy. It is a stock Intel cooler. Hooray! It comes in the box, it's free. So if you want to save every penny, there'll be some thermal paste pre-applied, and then you'd literally just place this down and then hook it into the board and you'd be set. The problem is, every single time I use this, I'm devastated with how, I'm going to say it, how it is, because it makes an absolute racket and the CPU still runs really hot. Like, it's the worst of both worlds. But it is free, so if you're trying to save every penny, this is not a bad way of going just for a month or so, just to save yourself 30, 40 pounds. But I just don't really want to recommend doing that anymore, which is why we are going for a standalone cooler. This one has RGB. If you want to save money, go for one that doesn't, but you can find this for roughly 30 pounds or dollars or so. Hyper 212. You can get more performance with something like the Arctic Freezer 36, but as this isn't a particularly high performance CPU, it doesn't use too much power, so it's not that it's not worth going for, but it's not required. And getting this set up is actually pretty straightforward. Just remove the fan, then you want to grab these little Intel plates. Then with the screws facing downwards and holding the whole thing upside down, you should just be able to screw these into position. Then just grab the thermal compound that comes in the box, place this little blob in the middle, pick up your back plate, and rest that underneath. These 4 screws should be as far out as possible, and then you can just pick up your cooler and it should line up and then screw into position, making sure that you do this in a cross pattern though, just to apply even force. Then it is literally just a case of grabbing that fan once again, hooking it over the cooler, and then connecting the fan to this little grey CPU fan socket here, and then this addressable RGB at the top right. Now, case. This is also a very weird area when it comes to budget systems, because you pretty much got 2 options. You've got one like we did in the previous B570 build, again, find that at the top right corner of your screen, where you go for the cheapest case really that you reasonably can that has fans on it. The problem with this is that the quality will almost certainly be bad, and the fans themselves probably won't have any software control, so they're just on a certain amount all of the time, and if they're too loud, well, you're stuck with it unless you replace it. So the other option is to go for something like this. This is the NZXT H5 Flow 2024, and this is not a budget-friendly case necessarily, but at the time of filming in the UK, you can actually get the non-RGB version of this for around about £60, which I think is great. And that is going to get you something that is just much higher quality, is going to look better, and ultimately you're going to want to keep for a longer period of time. I mean, upgradability is such a big thing for building a gaming PC, but if you obsess about it with every component, then the whole PC can start to get really expensive and not give you extra gaming performance. But if you can buy a decent case on sale, that is actually the best way of getting something that's more affordable but still maintaining quality. So there will be some other suggestions and we will leave them links down below, but this is the NZXT H5 Flow 2024. And it's also white, which goes nicely with our Strix motherboard, but obviously if you went for the black version, if you went for the other motherboard, then that would also make sense too. So we just pick this up, gently lower this into position, then realize that we need to change the standoffs, because of course this is a M80X motherboard. We just use a pair of pliers or a mini wrench just to take these ones out, and then on your corresponding motherboard you need to work out where they go and then obviously fit them back down. Once you've done that, you should be ready to rock and roll for real, and you'll soon find out whether you've done it right or not. Then use the screws provided with the case to get it fitted down. But let's give our case a spin round and actually open up the backside, shall we? And see what we have in store. Now, obviously I have built in this before, which is why I say actually I quite like it. The main thing that's kind of different about this is that the power supply is actually right down at the bottom, and that's going to breathe upwards, which means that you don't have feet on the case itself, which means the profile of the chassis is smaller than it otherwise could be. You get a lot more space inside because of the way that they've moved things about, which is a nice touch. Obviously, the thing we need to do now is to actually plug in all of these cables. Now, this one is our HD audio, but I like the fact that all of these cables are white with the white version, so it's going to look a lot cleaner and less messy. We also have our addressable RGB, we have our USB 3, our USB Type-C, and then hiding all the way here, we have our front panel connection. The most important one is this one called front panel down at the bottom right. Above that, you've got your USB 3 and your USB Type-C. And it definitely is good practice to always plug in your HD audio. It's this one at the bottom left like that. But because I'm not going to use it, and I actually think most people probably aren't going to use the analog audio on the top of your case, if you're in this particular scenario and you don't want this horrible ugly cable, it is okay to not plug it in. The port just won't work. It's not that the rest of your PC is going to fail. It's just that that one port won't work. Our last couple are a little bit more fiddly and are located at the top. You've got another addressable RGB, and then 2 fan headers at the top. But only 2 more bits left to go actually, and I think we're gonna insert our graphics card now. Where I have used this case before, I've already removed these PCIe fingers, but because this is a micro ATX motherboard, I will need to swap them around a little bit because slot 1 is slot 1 on the back, whereas on a standard ATX it's usually 2 and 3. Then it is much easier to actually plug in your graphics card if you lay your case down flat once again. Then you can literally just pick it up, carefully line this up with the slot, then give it a good push till it clicks into position. remembering, of course, to screw it back down. And then, ladies and gentlemen, you are ready for the final components, the power supply. And this is like pretty boring as far as I'm concerned, because this is the go-to. This is the one I would choose my personal rig at this sort of budget. It is the A650BN from MSI. It's only rated as bronze for efficiency. It's only 650 watts, but it's still more than you're going to need for a rig like this. And okay, if you want to like upgrade it to like an RTX 5080 at a later date, you're going to have to swap your power supply out as well. But whilst overspeccing your power supply is great for longevity and efficiency and things like that, this level, just get the cheapest good one from a reputable brand that you know works, rather than spend loads of money on something you just don't need. But remembering this time to break the habit of a lifetime and actually having our PSU fan facing upwards, slot this into the back of your chassis, get that safe and secure. Then you can, of course, start getting these cables and feeding them through to the other side. All we're going to need is our CPU, an ATX, and then our PCIe power connections for the GPU. All of these SATA and Molex connections we're not going to use. Which then just leaves us with the act of actually connecting it all together. So we've got our ATX at the top right, CPU connection at the top left, and then the absolute final piece of the puzzle is this graphics card 8-pin connection here. And apparently to redo my fan on the cooler that's come a bit loose. Maybe do a bit of tidying up as well, because obviously we could attach this cable here just to make it look neat. And then when you come around to the other side, well, I've already done it here, but just make sure you're using all of the channels and things just to keep all of the cables nice and neat so that the side panel goes on and it's easier to upgrade and you know where everything is if you do open up this back. But should we get this turned on and see if it works? And spoiler alert, I'm actually expecting this not to work, because remember what I said about updating the BIOS. It is worth just turning it on first, I suppose, and seeing if it boots, because it shouldn't do any damage to your system. But if the BIOS doesn't recognize our 14th gen CPU, we are going to have to do the BIOS update. But again, I'll show you how to do that if it doesn't boot. All you need to do is grab a USB flash drive, make sure that it is formatted in FAT32, then go on the motherboard manufacturer's website for the exact model that you've got, download the latest BIOS file, and then depending on the one that you have, put it in the port on the back that's actually labeled as BIOS, and then follow the instructions and wait for it to reflash, and then you will be at this point. And once you've done that, obviously you'll then need a copy of Windows, also on a USB drive. Better not to have them on the same one, to be honest, have them as two separate if you can. And this is also very straightforward. We've done a full video about how to install Windows, so if you're having any trouble, just follow this, but it is very straightforward. And actually at this point, I do realize that we do need a mouse and keyboard, but I also need to tell you that there is a massive clearance sale on the PC Centric mouse mat. Once this is gone, it will be gone. We are not making any more. So now is the time to get hold of one of these for a very, very low price. You can find the link down below or just go to pccentric.store. Once you are at this stage, just press F1 and then it will go into your BIOS. And this is where we can enable XMP. Mine's already enabled where I've clearly used this motherboard before and it's remembered. But this just makes sure that the RAM is running at its full rated speed, essentially. And then you can also go to this one called QFan Control. And again, I've already done this apparently, but you just want to set a custom curve actually on your CPU fan, just so it only ramps up when it absolutely needs to. Otherwise, you're going to find that your PC will just be loud when it doesn't need to be loud. Then go up to the top where you have this setting called resize bar. It should be on by default, but just double check, because otherwise you lose a lot of performance on your graphics card. But then it is just a case of hitting save and exit and installing your games. And as if by magic and through the power of editing, here we are then all set up and ready to go. And I've got to say, we didn't even mention the way the system looks, and I gotta say, I really dig it. Now, it doesn't always work having a white case and black components, but actually they kind of go together quite nicely. I think it's because you've got a mixture throughout the system. It's not kind of like sticking out at all. Obviously, I think you can get something that's better looking. The main way would be to go for an ATX motherboard that properly populates this slot, or obviously you could go for a cheaper M-ATX case and then this would all work out. The main thing is just be very cautious when you're choosing the bits, because sometimes things are better value than others. So for example, here we've got obviously our Intel 14400F, but if you can get a Ryzen equivalent that has more upgradability and slightly better gaming performance, and the whole package isn't really that much more money, if at all, then obviously that's the way I would go. But if you are trying to save as much money as possible and you can work around this CPU, then it definitely has a lot to offer. And to show you, let's jump into the games. And actually the place I want to start off is this. It's a new strategy game, and it has almost like its spiritual roots in Command & Conquer, which was pretty much the first game really that got me into PC gaming. That and Hitman, which probably wasn't great for like a 6-7-year-old, but hey, one of my friends' brothers or something showed me that game, but that's beside the point. I've actually been enjoying it. This is around about like an hour or so into the game, I would say no spoilers, but I don't think it's that sort of title. But as you can see, it's running really, really well on this. I did wonder whether, not necessarily an indie title, but one that wasn't like AAA would have the same optimization on Intel Arc, but I've had absolutely no issues with this whatsoever. This is currently running at 1440p at max settings, so the very high preset, and as you can see, we're getting around about 90 FPS. I did actually try this at 4K as well, and we were getting about 60, so there's no problem running this essentially whatsoever, right? Very, very easy to operate, and we are using XeSS set to the highest setting, but if you didn't want to do that, then that would be fine. But yes, I think it's fair to say that if you did enjoy the original Command & Conquer games, then this one is going to be right up your alley. They've even got fake Tiberium, this little red glowing stuff here. Oh look, and as we fire up our next title, look, I've earned the Abbey trading card. Yay me. And if you have absolutely no idea what I'm talking about, then let me introduce you to the start of The Last of Us Part 2. This has just come out on PC, and it's a little bit weird actually, because when I first fired this game up, remember that the original Part 1 on PC definitely had some VRAM issues when it launched. I was a bit unsure how it was going to work on ARC, and in the very opening scene, Joel's face was getting some weird artifacting that I couldn't get rid of, but as soon as we got past that scene, it was fine, but the game was very stuttery. I mean, this frame time graph was going boom, 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 and it was borderline unplayable really, and I was thinking, well, maybe this is something to do with like CPU, maybe this is VRAM. I tried setting all of the settings down, we had this at 1080p low, but we persisted with the issue. So I then restarted the system, I turned all of the efficiency cores off, because I was thinking maybe that will help, and magically, everything was fine again. So I assumed that was the problem, but then I restarted it with all of the efficiency cores again like we have here, and as you can see, it's also running fine. So if you are having issues with The Last of Us when you first boot it up, I'd say maybe like play it for a few minutes, then just restart the title, maybe even restart your PC, try again, because this seems to have magically fixed it for whatever reason. But yes, you can see we're currently getting around about 95 FPS at the moment, and this is a combination of medium to, is it medium to high? I mean, let's actually jump into the settings before I tell you a load of porkies. I think this is running at the medium preset. And then yes, I've actually turned up the texture filtering to 8x. We're running this at 1440p. And as you can see, we're getting around about 95 FPS, which I think is pretty impressive really for a graphics card that's supposed to cost around about £220 or $220. In the UK, it's pretty much bang on the money. As I say, in the States, not so much at the moment. But do bear in mind, this is definitely an easier part of the game to run. So we're not actually limited by the CPU here. You can see our GPU utilization is pretty much bang on 100%, and everything is tickety-boo. But if we reload to a slightly earlier bit in the game, then you can see quite a different result actually. Now, I've heard as well, once you get to Seattle and there's a load of buildings and stuff, you really can start to see reduced performance, but again, I imagine this is down to CPU bottlenecking, so you can now see that our frame rate is anywhere between about 60 and 70 FPS or so, and our GPU utilization has dropped down to about 75-80%. And this is an area where if you were to buy a stronger CPU, then you would get better results. And before you say there's no upgradability with this whatsoever, don't forget you could always upgrade to like an i7 at a later date if you wanted to, right? Maybe get one in the used market in a couple of years' time, but obviously you don't then have the option of grabbing like an X3D Ryzen chip at a later date, whereas if you went for AM5 with something like a 7600 or 7500F, then you could do that. But yes, whilst we certainly were having problems initially, it does seem to be running quite well now at around about 60 to 80 FPS, but we will be CPU bound. But ladies and gentlemen, you have now reached everyone's favorite section of the gameplay, this being the multiplayer titles. And we're going to start this off with some Fortnite, and yes, once again, we've got the best skin in the world here. We're once again running this at 1440p, and I'll say the reason we didn't test Last of Us at 1080p was not because I forgot, definitely not that, but because obviously when you're bottlenecked at 1440p anyway by the CPU, then you've essentially got free performance just to turn it up to 1440. I mean, I'll get Editor Carl to actually show you some gameplay on the B580 rig with the 7600, so you can do a little bit of a comparison, because I believe the settings are exactly the same. But around about 125 FPS, 1440p, everything is set to high, other than view distance and textures, which is set to epic. So a lot of people wouldn't expect to have the settings this high in this title, right? You'd probably want to turn some things down and things, but obviously it depends on the monitor and depends on the frame rate really that you're trying to achieve. A lot of people say to me, why don't we turn the settings all the way down to low? Well, you can do that. You can run it in the performance mode if you want even high FPS, but personally, this is the way that I choose to play, so it's just interesting to see how this would perform at a nice kind of balance, really, between quality and performance. And with over 100 FPS at 1440p, this definitely shows that this system has a lot to offer. But for those of you that are rocking a 1080p monitor, and I'm sure there are a lot of you, this is how it runs at the exact same settings at 1080p. I will also add that we are using XeSS set to Ultra Quality Plus here, just to give ourselves a little bit extra performance. But if you wanted to turn this off, you can. But personally speaking, especially at 1440p, you can't really notice a difference. 1080p might be a different story though. But again, this is kind of more about getting the highest performance possible rather than the best image quality. So yes, about 140 FPS, and we're actually still bottlenecked by the GPU rather than the CPU. I'm sure there will be some occasions where it will trade blows, but you can see it's not exactly a massive deal in this game. I think it's quite well balanced actually. And actually in terms of our RAM utilization, it's just under 16 gigabytes. This is why I say realistically 32 gig is going to be the way to go, because we're maxing out the RAM you would have if you cheaped out essentially without having any other applications in the background, no RGB software, no Discord, no Chrome, nothing like that. So 32 definitely is going to be the way to go. But ladies and gentlemen, the time to properly up the ante has begun, because this is some Call of Duty Warzone, and this is a very demanding game on the CPU. So if there was a title, especially multiplayer, that was going to be limited, I would expect it to be this. But perhaps interestingly enough, it doesn't appear that we are bound by the CPU in this current scenario. We've got this set to a mixture of settings actually, I'll show you in just a second, but it's essentially medium and high really across the board. And look, our GPU utilization is still at about 100%. We are using XeSS as well. We've got this currently set to Ultra, not Ultra Quality Plus. Textures are cranked all the way up to max, and yeah, you can see we're getting around about 80 to 85 FPS. Now, this obviously isn't the highest like multiplayer game you're going to see in the world. If you play something like Apex Legends or anything esportsy, you're definitely going to get higher FPS than this. But for what potentially is a worst case scenario, I mean, I suppose like Battlefield's pretty intense as well. This, I don't want to say it's the minimum you can expect, but at 1440p, I don't think 85 FPS is actually too shabby. Now, you could turn the settings down a little bit more, or of course run this at 1080p, but if you do have a 1440p monitor and you want to, well, not max it out, but certainly get your money's worth, shall we say, out of the pixels, then this is not a bad way to do it. But let's see what happens if we turn this down to 1080. And if I was a betting man, I definitely would expect to see a little bit of CPU bottlenecking, and sure enough, every now and then it does appear to be the case, but it seems to be quite well balanced actually, because there it is, look, dip of about 91, 93%. It's nothing crazy. You are going to be trading blows. Remember I say you quite, well, like essentially your game frame rate is 2 lines and they kind of like do that. The closer that they are together, the better value, I suppose you could say, you're actually getting out of your system, because you're not overspending on one component. Now obviously this does mean that in the future, if you want to get a new graphics card and play something like Call of Duty Warzone, then your frame rate isn't necessarily going to change all that much, because obviously you're still going to be held back by the CPU. But future upgrade you could definitely do would be something like a Core i5 or Core i7, one of the K versions. You'd need a better cooler to get the most out of it, but you definitely should see an increase to the FPS. So if you could get one of those at a later date on the used market, that would be not a bad option. But yeah, around about 115 FPS now, 1080p at decent enough settings. I think most people are going to be happy, but obviously this is not an RTX 5090 when it comes to overall performance. In terms of thermals and acoustics, we're getting around about 62, 63 degrees on that CPU. The whole system is whisper quiet, and our CPU is consuming about 65 watts. And then on the graphics card, again, very, very cool and quiet, 56 degrees. So plenty of headroom. This case and all of the mesh is probably a little bit overkill for it, but it doesn't hurt. It just means you get a nice quiet system. So running flat out, it's just like a very quiet whir. If you have any sort of noise, doesn't have to be headphones, this could be very quiet speakers and you wouldn't hear it. So very, very effective overall. Oh, and there's actually someone to get. Yes, there we are. And our RAM utilization as well, me being useful, is over 16 gig again. So 32 is the way to go. And so with that then, ladies and gentlemen, that is apparently everything you need to know about this rig. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, especially that CPU. Is the 14400F the bargain of a century, or is tying you into a motherboard that's not going to be updated with any future CPUs a deal breaker for you, even if you are trying to save as much money as possible? Let us know which way you would go down in the comment section below. Let us know as well what you like about this system and what else you would change about it. And if you are interested in grabbing anything, then as always, our affiliate links are listed down below. But smash the like button if you've enjoyed this, get yourself subscribed, and as I say, all of the suggestions as well for some of the changes I might make to the system are all located down in the description. And while while you're down there, why not radiate in the glow of the new Aorus Master 16? This gigabyte laptop packs up to an NVIDIA RTX 5090 mobile graphics chip, in addition to a 24-core Intel Ultra 9 CPU, bringing a ludicrous amount of gaming grunt that is properly portable. You also find a Dolby Vision HDR-ready OLED display for truly mesmerizing gameplay, as well as AI-powered optimizations thanks to Gigabyte's GI Mate for better battery life, performance, and noise levels. Learn more about this absolute powerhouse laptop today with a link down below. But thank you guys so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.